Make sure that...
Good afternoon. This is Talking Drupal. This is our weekly chat about web design and development from your group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We are recording this again on Wednesday afternoon at Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 89. It is Wednesday, March 11th, 2015. Today's show is Patch, Build, or Cannibalize. Wow, what a great title. Welcome, guys.
We're roping people in with the title. We're going to get a lot of zombie apocalypse lovers
Exactly.
listening in.
And so joining us, as usual, we have John Picozzi from Oomph. Welcome, John.
Good afternoon, Drupalverse.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm fabulous. I think I'm already teaching a class tonight at Johnson & Wales in Providence about Drupal. So I think I'm all ready for that. It's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to it.
Is it a new session starting, or?
Yep, they start classes this week, and they go until May.
Ah, cool. So this is one of the reasons we moved the Drupal PVD to Tuesdays instead of Wednesdays?
No, because I could next term or in the spring I could be teaching, or summer, fall rather.
Tuesday.
I could be teaching in the fall. You never know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we had a Drupal PVD meeting, our last one at the Founders League, and we're moving it to Oomph's new offices in Providence next month, which is looking forward to.
It's going to be a good time. I look forward to it as well.
So we also have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design.
Good afternoon. It's a balmy 49 degrees up here. Stuff's starting to melt. Feeling pretty good. Starting to feel like spring. Although we've got snow coming this weekend, so we'll see about that. But it's things are starting to warm up a little bit.
It's going to be all rain down here. There's going to be a little bit of snow, but then we're going to switch over to rain.
We're going back and forth through the weekend, I think.
We won't know until it gets here. So
I was just in the car a few minutes ago, and the sun is shining, the sky is blue, and the ground is soaking wet everywhere. It's kind of funny looking because there's so much snow melt. I had about 18 inches of ice in my gutters a week ago. It was pretty bad in a couple of sections of my house, and it's down to about 5 inches now left. So I'm imagining by the end of the day tomorrow I'll have a nice clean roof.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I got some plywood down in my front yard to be able to step over some of the muddy patches.
Yeah.
It's a little piece together, but it's necessary unless you want to lose a shoe.
Yeah. So today we're talking the title Patch, Build, and Cannibalize. We're talking about what to do when you need some functionality in a website and you're trying to decide whether to use a module, to build it yourself, or to take a module and cannibalize it. And we can talk about what that means a little bit later. But we're talking about the challenge of you have design and functionality requirements that don't necessarily meet what Drupal has available to you in some modules that are out there, and how do you deal with that? So is this a big problem for you guys, or is this like a minor piece of every project?
I would say it's probably, at least for me, I feel like it's kind of minor. I don't find myself struggling with the last two as much in projects. Patching is kind of just a thing we have to do sometimes. Almost every site requires a patch, or might require a patch. A lot of our sites require us to build modules, but it's definitely not something on the average Drupal site that we're kind of running into. And then, we'll talk about cannibalization, and that's always kind of our last line of defense. If we find something that's kind of working and we need to tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common. I mean, it really depends on the kind of projects that you're working on. If you're building a small business site that's little more than a brochure, then you're likely not even needing to patch a module, never mind build something. But once you start getting more complex sites and more unique workflows, um, it's more likely that you won't have a specific module that meets every need, and you'll have to write small utilities to make things match together well, or you'll have to write something custom um, in order to allow input better or display information in a more natural way.
It seems like a natural flow of as you start with Drupal or any other tool, as you start to get experience with it, you start to do bigger projects and maybe more complex things, and then you find yourself looking for custom solutions and coding. Sometimes, or I find myself in this mode of thinking that it's sometimes better or quicker or easier for me to tailor something than it is to keep hunting for that exact solution for what I'm looking for. I think that's a little bit of a danger to get into.
Yeah, you kind of want to be aware of what you're doing. You don't want to be just sitting there and duplicating efforts of the Drupal community and putting stuff on projects here and there that isn't being contributed back to Drupal. But you also don't want to be in a position where you're not able to provide functionality your customer needs because you're keeping yourself only to the contrib space. So it's always a position where you need to find the best path forward so that you can provide either utilize the efforts of the Drupal community or provide what you're doing in a way that's useful to other Drupalists.
Yeah, I always actually find myself in the exact opposite role, where I'm always like looking for the module to fix the problem or the functionality that I need. And more recently, I've been willing to kind of develop my own modules. Because that's a kind of a large part of what we do at Oomph is custom solutions and finding a solution for every problem. But I still find myself like, come on, there's got to be a module for this. Somebody has had to have this problem before. I'm not like new to Drupal, new to the internet. This isn't the first time this has happened. Usually what I do is I'll take about an hour and do some R&D on Drupal.org and see if I can find a module, test out a couple of things, see what what works, what doesn't. And within that hour, if I find that I have something that's 75 or 90% of the way there, I might spend another half an hour and try to get it to the 100% mark. If I spend that hour and I'm just like, no, not finding anything, this is not going to happen, then I'll definitely drop into building a module mode where I pull out my module template and start going at it.
John, what about the alternative to that, which sometimes is you go back to the design team on a project and say, you know what? I can't really find a straightforward solution to do what you're trying to do, but I have these alternatives. And like, how often do you guys find yourself driving the design or the functionality based on what you can do easier than other things? I do think that's an important thing to keep designers involved in. So not that it has to be not that the site has to be like a Drupal site and does everything that Drupal always does, but I think it's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'll actually, when we get to some examples, I'll talk about one instance where we had this module that was working and doing what we needed it to do, but the functionality was not 100% there. And I always keep an open line of communications with my clients and definitely say there have been instances where I've said to them, here's what out of the box this will do. Now, if you want to get it, change it or modify it, here's what we're going to need to do that, and here's what the associated cost is. And then it comes down to, okay, well, is it worth the time and energy? Are we going to be able to reuse that elsewhere on other sites for that client, so on and so forth. So for me, a lot of times it comes down to communicating with the client as opposed to the design team. But sometimes it does come down to like, okay, you wanted this to slide out by default, it pops up. Is that okay? Do we really need it to slide out? And a lot of times it'll be no, as long as there's some sort of jQuery action there to draw attention to it, that's fine.
And oftentimes it comes down to dollars and timetable. I actually find it comes down to timetable more than dollars sometimes. Is like, say, hey, I can do this. It's going to add 3 days to the deliverable, but if I do it this way, I can have it done in 20 minutes. And oftentimes that will sway people's decision and say, hey, you know what? I'd love it to do the way we originally wanted it, but you know what? Let's put that in the back burner and try to deal with that later on.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a lot of times it's timetable and budget. I actually had an instance a couple months ago where it was definitely just functionality. The client was like, "This is not what the functionality that I want. Go back and code the custom solution to make it do what we want to do." And I said, "You know what? That's fine by me. I'll do whatever you want."
Yeah, and if it's a matter of style, many times having the quick and easy solution available for a demo is helpful as well. I mean, if you can say, well, we have this working this way, it's functional, it's not exactly what was requested, but in order to customize it, like you said, Steve, it might be an additional 3 days, but we have it working now, what do you want to do? And many times it's, well, yeah, let's put a pin in it and we'll come back to it in phase 3, because at the end of the day, it's not an important piece.
So we talked about selecting contrib modules in episode 2, I'm looking at in our notes here. So way back in, that's probably April of 2013, maybe? Something like that.
April or May.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So, and...
Hold the presses. This show's been going on for almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
Almost.
It's time for our farewell show.
It's June 13th, 2013.
Okay, June. Okay.
All right. So we got a couple more months.
Got a couple more months before we say goodbye to John. And it seems like we said goodbye to Jason, just while we're on the topic. So Jason is still with us. Jason has just taken a new job in Boston and is going to contribute to the show on a somewhat regular basis. So for those of you that are wondering where he is, he'll be back at some point.
And for those of you that only watch the show for Jason, keep on watching. We promise to be entertaining.
That's right. Or you can go back to previous episodes. That's right. We're on Netflix now. You can just... I'm just kidding.
Right next to House of Cards.
Right. So let's talk about when the modules that you installed just don't work for you. I mean, there's just something missing. It's not quite what you want it to do. It doesn't. You've worked through the scenarios of my customer can't live with this, or you don't want to live with it. So what are your next steps?
Yeah, so we're going to assume that you've listened to and memorized episode 2 of Talking Drupal and gone through the whole process, and you've come to the conclusion that there's no alternatives that meet your needs better. You found a module. Either you found a module that fairly well meets your needs or haven't found anything. If you found one that meets your needs fairly well, I know a common example of this, here's your Jason for the week. A common example of this was the image caption module. The image caption module works quite well. However, there's one small piece that doesn't work responsively. So there's a patch that I know at least the 4 of us will apply to the module when we use it that makes it work just that much better. And it's a pretty small patch. Next option, if there's really nothing out there that matches what you're doing, you can always just build something from scratch. And we'll get into some examples of that in a moment. And then the third option is cannibalize, and this is, as John said, pretty much the last option. It's when you find a module that maybe does 50% of what you need, or does at the core interacts with an API the way you need, but doesn't provide the functionality, or is just really overbloated. So you essentially fork that module. You take the module, change the name, strip out the pieces you don't need, and write the functionality that you do need. And typically when you're doing this, it's for a very specific use case. It's not something that can be readily contributed back to the project. It isn't really generic. It's very, very specific for the use case. Some people in the community kind of frown on that, but sometimes it's necessary.
I just can't imagine anyone who's been doing Drupal for any period of time has not run into that scenario. Not that anyone wants to do it, but I think it's a scenario you run into.
I think in the last 20 websites that I've built, I've probably had to do it once.
That's a pretty high percentage.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not, it's definitely not something. Again, it's a last resort, and it's something where if you're 95% of the way there with a module and you can manipulate a few lines of code, it's going to work to your favor. Your client's going to be happier because they got something with less time and ultimately less money, and it's not going to involve you having to go through a bunch of testing because somebody's kind of done that for you. Now, how you feel about that, it's kind of a gray area. I feel like it's an open source community, so we're all about helping each other, and that's one way that somebody can help you. So it's okay, but again, it's not always the first option, at least for me.
So let's talk about our three scenarios, and we'll go in order and give some examples. We get the patch, build, and cannibalize. So what are some concrete examples we have of when we've needed to patch? Get some examples here.
So I'll let you go first, John.
Thanks. I actually just recently, over this past weekend, submitted a patch, and it was on the pop-up on load module, which is, if you're looking for a pop-up on load, funny, this module does a great job of it. Works with context, cookies the user so they don't get the pop-up.
Wait,
again.
are you talking about those really annoying pop-ups that say sign up for our newsletter when you visit the website and cause me to close the tab and never ever visit that website again?
Well, sort of.
Yes.
I guess I am talking about those.
So it's popping up some content when a page loads.
Exactly.
Okay.
When you hit a page on the site, it's popping up content. You can close it. It'll cookie you. It'll never pop up again, or it'll pop up within whatever window you set, as far as a day, a week, whatever. But
it sounds like an interesting module of the week at some point.
Yeah, we definitely should put that on the list. But what I found was that this module worked great until I tried to give my user permission to add content to it. Basically, boiling it down, what ended up happening is there was a conflict between how the text format for the pop-up on load body field was set and how the text format module was expecting it to be set. So I was like, oh, this is a problem, and I looked into it to figure out what the problem was. I found in the code where there was an issue, and I basically added in an if statement to check the text format and fix it or not apply it if it was unset. Now, I manipulated that module. I hacked that module, right? And I could have just uploaded that to my site and called it a day, but it really warranted, going through the patch process and pulling it down from Drupal.org, applying my changes to the code and developing a patch for it. And the reason this is beneficial one, you're giving back to the community. Somebody else that's having that problem can find your patch, apply it, and they won't have that problem anymore. That's numero uno, which is great. But also, it gives you the ability to keep track of that change on update. So, the next time I go to update that module, if my patch hasn't been rolled into the latest update, I'm going to have to reapply that patch. And what we actually do is we have a patch folder within our Sites All folder, and we just drop patches in there for anything that we've patched. So now I had a patch in that folder to be able to say, like, hey, next time you update this module, make sure you apply this patch, or it's not going to work.
John, are patches that you guys do always contributed back?
Yeah, we usually, if we're doing it, we do a patch. We usually go through the process of committing them back. It's pretty straightforward. You just create an issue in the issue queue, yep. Upload the patch, and call it a day. We could probably have a show about that, which would be helpful. But it's kind of one of those things that if you don't have a lot of time, it's kind of a low-level thing that you can do to kind of help out in the community and give back, make modules better.
I have a similar example. I've mentioned a couple times on the show working with the REST-WS module. I think that ended up being a little bit more complex. There's 3 or 4 patches that I ended up working on, but it was similar things. REST-WS module didn't quite work with taxonomy, so patching it so that worked. It doesn't really work with images, so I modified an existing patch in order to get that working, and it also didn't really work very well with multi-value fields, so I worked on a patch that allowed that. And one of the other advantages for working through the, contributing the patch back that you didn't mention, John, is then the maintainer of the module and other people are able to review your patch and notice any bugs or any. For example, the taxonomy patch that I posted for REST-WS kept failing because the simple test for checking taxonomy on REST-WS was actually broken. That's why the taxonomy was passing even though it didn't work. And I don't know enough about testing it. I didn't know enough about testing at the moment to write that piece of the patch and put it in. But one of the module maintainers came by after I noted that the reason why I was failing was because the test was broken, and they were able to patch it. And now that is about to get committed. So if you're able to, as you had called it, hack, which I would argue that this part isn't hacking, if you're able to modify a module in a way that gets it to work, even if it's not necessarily the best way, it can bring attention to the issue, and the maintainer can fix it in a way that makes sense because they may have more intimate knowledge of the code base and be able to pull it in a way. So it's definitely, and also realize, like, hey, your fix might fix this portion, but that's an error that we made in 3 other locations of the module that you're not thinking about. So now they can take your piece and they can put it in different locations. So it's something that really helps. You're helping yourself as well as helping the community when you're posting patches back.
Yeah, that's a great point. To be able to say, like, oh, my patch got rolled into that module release as a fix to an issue is nice. I've had 1, maybe 2 modules that's actually happened for, and it's cool. It makes you feel like you're helping out.
Yeah, and they can, and in my experience, module maintainers are much more likely to, fix something up or put some effort into fixing it, even if it's not a complete fix, if you have a patch over just a comment. I mean, if a module maintainer is coming and there's 30 new issues and only 2 of them have patches, they're more likely to pay attention to those ones because people have already gone through the effort of finding where the issue is and providing, at least a partial solution. So it's been, it's definitely the preferred method.
So while we're talking about patches, let's talk about like patching core. So we had at the Drupal PVD last night, which is our local meetup, we were talking about an issue that I found where if you're using the block IP address functionality in Drupal to block IP addresses, if an IP address gets blocked, there's a message that shows up to a user coming in from that IP address that it's a white screen that says this IP address is blocked. And I wanted to customize what that message was and there was no way to do it. This is probably this is an outlier case here, right? Really, because this code is executed before like the bootstrapping process of Drupal starts, so there's no hooks into even modifying this message. But let's say you find yourself in that situation. I think the only conclusion I came to is that I modified core, and I just need to track that myself. I'm not even sure. I guess the point here is I could post this back to Drupal.org, but I'm not sure what the solution would be. I'm not even sure I can think of one.
I mean, there has to be, because I was at the Drupal Providence meetup yesterday too. I've been thinking about it. I mean, it's generally heavily frowned on to hack core, but occasionally it's necessary. Like during Drupalgeddon, it was necessary in order to prevent compromise. In this case, it's documented that there's no hooks, so there's no way to get it in there. But I mean, there's got to be some way to store a message in a session variable or a cookie or something.
I was thinking that a solution could potentially be that you create a variable in settings.php, but I'm not even sure that's loaded yet.
Yeah, but I mean, well, the session variable or the cookies would still be loaded. So you just, before you ban the message, the reason why the message isn't modified is because it doesn't show up. But if you set the message in a cookie before the ban happens, and then just read from that cookie, although it seems like a lot of effort to be able to customize the ban
for this very small case.
And there's much bigger fish to fry. But it's an interesting thought. But yeah, occasionally, I would say that's a case of hacking. More so than what.
And I'm not sure there's any way around it. So let's move on to the next case, which is we have a patch and then build. So at what point do you decide? What do we mean by build? Are we saying to build a custom module? Or are we saying to put some hooks into a module that's there?
Well, I think part of the module review process is to definitely, if the module that you have found on Drupal.org gets you 85% of the way there, and there are hooks that you can use to get you the rest of the 100%, you should definitely use that module, use those hooks. When I think of build, I think that there is no module out there that even gets me, close to 100%. Maybe it's only 20%. At that point, I'm thinking, okay, well, I should probably just build a module myself, and that's usually from the ground up for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different classes of modules when you're talking about building them. The first class is like a small utility module, or some people call them glue modules, or a build around me module. An example of that is when you need to, you need to do a hook form alter to change the way a form is being submitted, or the way a form is being displayed. Or another example is, I use the checklist API module in a couple of websites in order to provide a developer's checklist, so I make sure I hit all the points that I need to when deploying a new website on the platform. And while the checklist API module itself does nothing, it provides an API. I'm building a module from scratch, but I mean, its only purpose is for that. So I mean, I'm not really building a module from scratch. I'm just taking advantage of the use case. Another kind of class of module, I guess, would be a custom module, a module that adds new functionality, and it's either providing its own hooks or isn't really relying on module hooks. Maybe it relies on views hooks or Drupal core hooks, but it's building something custom that doesn't exist elsewhere. And this can either be site-specific, so something that's doing something very specific for your client and nobody else really have a need for it, or it could be something more generic. And the more generic ones generally end up on Drupal.org, or should. And examples of that obviously are like views or see tools or even register a commerce or something like that. So I think that there's, like I said, a couple different classes of modules. There's the small utility modules that are usually very site specific, but are just kind of tweaking functionality, or building off of an API module. And then there's something custom where you're building it from the ground up to take care of some business needs your client has. And those modules can either be site specific or generic.
So how often do you guys find yourself building, and what are some examples of when you would do that?
So I'll give a couple examples here and I'll let you guys chime in. I find myself, now that I'm more comfortable with it, doing it more and more often. It's once you get used to it, it's much easier rather than just hunting around or getting used to something that doesn't quite work, to just build a small module. One of the earlier ones that I did was a module that allowed switching a views display based on whether or not a toggle was clicked. So I have a view that shows a list view. I have 3 views, and they both have 2 displays. They all have 2 displays, a list view and a grid view of the content. And I wanted that list versus grid to be preserved across the 3 different views. And there's no way to do that, and there were no modules that I could find. So I got some help from Steven's partner, and we looked at it, and I ended up building a small custom module that sets a session variable on whether or not the user has selected grid or list. And then whenever taking a look at one of those views before rendering it, checks the variable, and then chooses the display based on the variable. Probably less than 100 lines, maybe 150 lines of code, very small, and pretty straightforward.
One of the great things about launching into that world of figuring that you can build a custom module and modify stuff is there that you really get. It's the point in Drupal that you get to the point of realizing that you really can build anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's the point of that. You know what? Yeah, there's almost nothing I can't do, because I now understand. When you start to understand that the strong APIs that are in place, in Drupal 7, the hooks that are in there, you realize that there's almost nothing you can't do, and sometimes you have to restrain yourself a little bit from that.
Yep.
John, do you have an example?
Yeah, most recently, a client came to us with a requirement to add Hreflang tags to their site, and after doing my standard hour of R&D, I came to the conclusion that there wasn't a real great way to add Hreflang tags in the way that the client wanted me to the site. There is an Hreflang module.
John, what is Hreflang?
So, not to go down the rabbit hole here, but it's a relatively new standard that Google is using to evaluate your content. And basically, what it is it's basically a meta tag that signifies the language of the site or the region of the site. So it has to do with regional and multi-region, multi-language sites.
And the browser will do different things depending on what that tag is set to.
The search results will be different.
Yeah, it's more for the search engine than it is for the browser itself. Basically, what Google's using it for, as I understand it, is if you in Canada using the Google Canada, and you type in a search term, it's going to go out and it's going to serve up the proper regional site for that search term. So if you had a U.S. English site and a U.S. Canadian site, it would serve up the U.S. Canadian site for you.
The U.S. Canadian site?
Or the English Canadian site, rather. I apologize. So the Hreflang module that is out right now focuses heavily on language, different languages, and ties into the translation module. I needed the site to work for regional sites. So I have a client, all their websites are in English, but they have different regional sites that have different information or relatively the same information on them. So what we did is we actually built an Hreflang module that gave the client an admin section where they could add the appropriate Hreflang tags to the site. And what it would do is it would construct those dynamically based on whatever page they were on, limiting it to make sure that it wasn't adding Hreflang tags that weren't supposed to be there.
Now, is it a meta tag or is it an attribute on the href tag?
It is, let me double check, but I'm pretty sure it's a meta tag with an alternate attribute on it.
Okay. Well,
I thought it was an anchor tag.
I'm sorry. It is a link tag with a rel attribute of alternate and an hreflang of whatever your region and language are.
Okay. Sounds good. Another example that I have for building something custom. This was actually ended up being quite the learning experience for me. I would consider myself, because this was an issue where you feel like contrib modules should allow you to do what I was trying to do. To sketch out really quickly, I had a group that had members in the group, and I needed to be able to create a table that took a field on the group page, which was a date, so we'll call them sessions, create columns with the sessions as a header, and then take the group members and put them as rows. Mm-hmm. And then cross-reference those two values and determine if there was a group node that referenced both of those things. And when you're looking at it, it feels like something that views should be able to do, because you can use views to grab all the date fields on a particular node. You can use a field to grab all the members of a group, and you can even use views to see if something's been referenced. But there's no way to take two separate entities, cross-reference values from them, and see if there's a third entity that has that value in views. So I actually spent a fair amount of time trying to build that.
You know what's funny, Nick, is as you're describing this, I'm thinking that we're going to get an email in 48 hours from someone that says, hey, by the way, this is how you do what Nick was trying to do in module ABC.
If somebody sends that, I'll be extremely impressed and pretty happy. But I spent a fair amount of time trying to build it, and I kept almost getting there, and it was taxing. But I finally decided to just buckle down and write it myself. And with something like entity field query, it ended up being pretty painless, and it took maybe 4 hours to build the whole thing, and everything works beautifully now. Maybe that is something that the thing is very specific, so something like that is very difficult to contribute back. Because it really depends on your entire architecture of the site.
Yeah, one of the funny things about like when you decide to patch things and when you're going to contribute back or not is that point of saying, here's this module that's doing this thing, and I want to do something different, but it's actually not even the nature of what this module was intended to do, or is kind of close, and it leaves you sort of funny. And do I contribute this patch back, because this patch or this recommendation is like taking this module in a completely different direction, or doing something that just doesn't even support today. Have you guys found yourself in that situation? I
think that's kind of the the defining moment between the patch and the cannibalization.
Right.
I think that if it's within the module's scope of operations and you're adding a feature, definitely patch it and put it up as a new feature to the module issue queue because, again, somebody could need that. But if you're taking that module and kind of like mangling it is probably a really strong word, but if you're kind of taking it off its intended trajectory to do kind of your own custom thing, then you're definitely in the cannibalize camp.
Are you a cannibal?
As I said, I have in the past cannibalized a module because it got me very close to where I wanted to be and only needed a few tweaks. An example.
So that's not a patch though, in our discussion today.
So here's my most recent example, and I can kind of tell you why I didn't patch it. I needed something called Nick is going to freak out, but I needed something called a hello bar, which is essentially a bar that pops up on the bottom of your page when somebody loads your website. Now,
the annoy the shit out of you bar. That's what you mean.
Yeah.
It has multiple names.
Is this on the exact same website as the pop-up unload?
No,
just bars and pop-ups everywhere when you go.
No, not at all, not at all. That would be funny though if they were. So this functionality needed to be controlled. Actually, similarly to the pop-up on load, where it needed to cookie the user and it needed to work with context and so on and so forth. The other driving force here was that the content that was inside the bar needed to actually be a web form block. So out of the box, the module does not enable the ability for you to kind of add custom content other than a message and a link. So at that point, I said, okay, this has like 95% of the functionality. All we need to do is add a web form block into the output and create logic for a cookie to be created and observed in the display. So for that, what I ended up doing is just hard coding a web form block into the module, and using context and the thank you message to set the cookie. So at that point, I didn't really feel like that was going to make a really great patch to kind of give back to the community, because there was no admin functionality for somebody to control what block you selected. Now, down the road, would I like to add that? Yeah, absolutely. But in the observance of time, it was just easier to kind of go the hard-coded route and put that module out there. So I did. Admittedly, I did cannibalize the module. What I did was essentially copied the module and then basically stripped out everything that had to do with the original module naming and changed it to my own naming convention. That way, there would be no conflicts between, if there was an update for the module that I was using, so on and so forth. So I very much separated them, put it into my custom module folder in my Drupal site, and started working on the customizations that I needed to make.
Are there licensing issues with this? I'm just wondering.
I believe only if you distribute it.
What does that mean, distribute it? Give it to someone else to use?
No, if you're... I think if you provide...
Yeah.
All I know is that that's
We're not lawyers here.
Yeah,
I
know you're not allowed to distribute it. You're allowed to modify it, but you're not allowed to distribute it.
Yeah, distributing it is basically, the way I view it is, it's if I were going to put it up on my website and say, here, this is a module
Gotcha.
that I built, and if you pay $5, you can have it.
Right.
That's just wrong. But I think, the Drupal community works under open source license, actually multiple open source licenses. So, the ability for me to manipulate somebody else's code and use it is, I think, well within that license.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you have to make it available or something, depending on. I mean, it gets really confusing, but as long as you're not selling it or claiming it as your own, generally, you'll be okay.
And to be honest, the changes that I made someday may end up in a patch in a patch as a feature enhancement for the module. When I get to like retirement or something like that and have more free time.
I found myself as a cannibal recently with a module. The basic functionality was there, and as I started to use it, I started to tweak it. Next thing I knew, I was adding. So this module created some tables in Drupal to manage content, and I was adding fields to those tables. So I was updating like the initialization process and the delete process, and I had really done a ton of changes to this module, and I'm really sort of at the point that it works now. But I'm wondering how I should handle this moving forward, because I would love to sort of provide this stuff back to the community, but I'm not even sure where to start right now, because I've taken what the initial functionality was and I've changed it significantly. So it can't even be a patch like at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first step in this case is really just communicate in the issue queue with the maintainer
about what I did and why I did it. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's clear. That will be my intent. That's going to be my goal too for the next 2 weeks, is to start that process there. And maybe I can end up helping contribute to this module or something. But because I really feel like the changes I made were great, and improved it dramatically, but it's so far off of where it is now. It's probably the right thing to do is to bring it back. Nick, do you have any other build or cannibalize examples of ways to handle things that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really cannibalized any modules, so I can't really speak to that. But building, I've got a couple other that I've done. For example, integrating manual templates with a statistics report. I helped build that recently. It was pretty helpful. So anytime you're integrating with an outside API that doesn't have a module, you're looking to build something custom.
Right.
So.
All right. So why don't we move on to our module of the week?
So this week's module of the week is really on target, I think. So this week's module of the week is hacked with an exclamation point. What the hacked module does is it provides some drush commands, and it will run against all of the installed modules and Drupal core that you currently have, download the same version that you have from Drupal.org, and then run a comparison and tell you any files that have changed. So it's very good for finding things like hacked core, patched modules, sort of custom modules, and sort of cannibalized modules. So when I say sort of is, if it's something that isn't released, it's going to say it's not checked. It also won't check dev releases.
Nick, is it doing like a diff between what you have and what's in?
So there's a few commands that you use. The first command is just HLP, and what it does is it just downloads every project that you currently have installed and tells you how many files were changed. So say like Drupal core had 4 files changed, 2 deleted, and menu block had 1 file changed and 1 deleted. Then there's a command called I think hacked details, and then wherever the module name is, the machine name, and it will tell you a little bit more details. It'll say like these files are changed, these ones are deleted, and then there's a hacked diff, and then you put in one of the files that were changed, and it will give you a diff. It will tell you, these lines were added, these lines were removed, and you can see.
What's the circumstance that you would use this module?
So I use it in a couple different cases. One, whenever I take over a project from somebody where I'm going to be contributing to the project, that's one of the first things I do is I download the code base, download the database, and run hacked just to see if they hacked core, if they modified file, because it's important to know you can't be running updates if somebody has patches in there that you don't know about. The other place is if I suspect that the site has been compromised, I run it. It's a very good way of finding suspicious files or includes or evals that just don't belong, and it's incredibly quick. It takes. You have a site that has 85 to 100 modules installed. It will take 30 seconds to run. It's incredibly fast.
So it's something you would install on your dev site, probably not leave it in production kind of thing?
Yeah, you don't want it in production. In fact, I think that there's, ironically, some security concerns having it in production.
Okay.
I don't fully know what they are, but it's just something that
you could probably be hacked if you had it installed.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if that's the module I'm thinking of.
Pun intended.
Pun intended. Yes, thank you, John.
But it's definitely something you don't want in production. But you want to run on a copy of production.
Right. Oh, good. John, have you used it before?
I have not. It would be very useful on a couple projects I'm thinking of right now. So I will be using it in the future.
I'm going to check it out myself. I just started working on a project where I've inherited a website from someone. As appalled as I am by some of the stuff done in there, I may be even more appalled if I run hacked. So I definitely need to check it out.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.
All right, guys. So any last comments with Patch Builder Cannibalize before we leave?
We don't condone cannibalization, but occasionally,
unless it's necessary.
says the guy up in the ivory tower.
Yes. Says Nick to the two cannibals. All right, guys. Hey, have a good week, and we'll chat next week.
See you next week.
All right, take care.